Welcome to part 3 of our basic Blender tutorial. So today we'll be building on what we've already learned with our been doing mostly modeling, and we did a bit of materials last time. We'll be continuing to do a little bit of modeling, but mostly learning about how nodes work in Blender and shading and creating some more advanced materials to create sort of a cooler look. And then we'll also have a little go at seeing rendering, which is how you transform your scene into a final result, your final picture that you want. So, okay, first of all, let's just clear this. Okay. So where were we last time? We were, there we go. So last time we had finished making this little rocket or something like that. So this was just the one I did, and you can see, remember, we made the body of the rocket. We added the engine, then we added the fins, and we used the mirror modifier to mirror them around to sort of duplicate them to make 4 of them. And we can, this is good because it means we can move them sort of dynamically, and it will all update. So if you wanted to move them up a little bit, down a little bit, off to the side, then the rest of them follow. We also added some little windows as well. And we added a little nose cone, and we gave it, using the solidifier modifier, just a little bit of thickness so it stands out. Then we added some basic materials. So we learned how in the materials tab here, you can assign materials and you can change their color. So we can change this blue material to anything we want. And we also learned how to assign different sections of a mesh to different parts of material. So we learned that you could select these different parts here and assign them to a different one here, like white. And again, you can change all this as much as we want. And we also learned some other sort of basic properties, such as I can change how metallic a material looks to create a sort of brass effect. And also you can change the transmission to make it look glassy. Brilliant. Okay, and also we do have our pencils still in the scene that are currently hidden by our rocket. So okay, let's begin. So first of all, I think I probably should have done this last time, but I think we need to clean some things up a bit. So if you look at our outliner on the right-hand side, our pencils, they're all nicely grouped in this sort of one, they're called collections. And these are really nice because we can sort of check them on and off. They're really easy, it just keeps everything nice and organized. But our rocket, they're all just sort of kind of lying out in the open under this sort of main mega collection here. So let's just organize this for a second. So what we can do is we can you can click on an object, and then we can hold shift, and we can select another one. So we can select all of our objects. And if we select our main rocket body last, that will be like the sort of the main object in our collection. And we do M, and we can do M. So it's like the move to a new collection. And so what we can do there, let's call it something sensible like rocket. Now, if you look here, all of our objects are now under this little rocket collection. So this is really good. So now what we can do is click this button to just hide them all temporarily. And it's much easier than sort of pressing this little sort of eyeball here, which lets us hide them all individually, which we could do, but it's just a bit of a hassle. So that's just nice and easy. So okay, we've just got our sort of a little bit of neatening. So today we'll be, as I said, we'll be doing some more advanced materials, and we'll be doing it on the pencils and the pencil cup. So we'll be adding a sort of a wooden texture to the pencil, and we'll also be making a funky pencil cup design. So I'll just be showing you what I personally managed to come up with, but this is completely up to you. Make whatever really cool designs you want. This is sort of a really fun bit because you can make some really cool looking stuff. And it's really not as complicated as you'd expect. So right, let's jump into it. So first of all, we need to make our pencil mesh a little bit more detailed because they're pretty good, but they're quite simple. So first of all, actually, to make this a little bit easier, I'll just hide everything but one pencil. We don't really need much for this. Okay, we have one pencil, and let us just reset its rotation, just so it's nice and sort of easy to do. So if you go into the press N to get the objects, also the options tab, under transform, you can see here its rotation values. It's currently got a little bit of rotation. So if we just type in 0 on all of these, we can just reset it. So it's nice and sort of pointing straight up. And actually, if we really want to, we can also set the locations. Just a bit easier to work with. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to add a bit more detail to the tip of the pencil here. So with a sort of a pencil, you know, it has that sort of wooden bit, right? And then like the lead at the end, sort of the colored bit, but there are sort of different angles, and the sort of the lead is sort of slightly different. So currently we've just got it in like one sort of big triangular face. So we want to add a bit of detail. So okay, first of all, I think we need to, it's a bit small here, but if we select all of these bits at the top, let's just expand these a bit, just so we know what's going on. Ooh. So press S to scale, and then we can do Shift and Z to scale it on the XY plane. There we go, just so we can see there. So, okay, what do we want to do? Well, I was thinking we could add some ring cuts like we did last time to sort of section it off into different parts. So if you remember, the hotkey for a ring cut is Control R, and this creates this little yellow sort of projection where we're going to be slicing the a ring into it. So I think as a pencil lead, so the color bit at the top, I think, how long do you think it should be? About that long? Could always change it later, but something about that. Okay, and then for the, okay, so okay, before we do anything else, let's make this correct proportion. So we grab this. So again, we could, there's a few ways of doing this. So we can go into X-ray mode, which is really helpful by pressing Alt-Z, which lets us just select all of the pieces like this, all of the vertices. Or you can press Alt and left click to do a ring select, so it selects everything in the ring there. So there's a bunch of ways of doing it, or you can press C to create this little cursor, which I quite like. But if we scale it down, and again, we can just sort of, something like that, just to get a bit of different sort of angles, and we do the same to the top again. So now it's looking a bit more like a, so you see how it's sort of, the angle changes between the wooden bit and then the lead. That's what I'm trying to sort of go for here. And in fact, if we add another ring cut here, I think it's a bit too tall actually. So if we grab all of our stuff and can press G for grab, here we go, and we can move it on the Z axis a bit further down. So there we go. So you see our pencil's a little bit sort of, I think, slightly nicely better proportioned here. And okay, let's just add another cut here. I don't think we quite need that one, but again, it's sort of, as a general rule of thumb, it's good to have as close to squares as possible. They don't have to be exactly squares, but in case you want to change things up. And for here, for our sort of main lead, we can do this. This is not strictly necessary, but again, just to sort of follow we want our faces as square as possible. Sorry, what I did here was you can do a ring cut, but then if you use the scroll wheel on your mouse, you can change the amount of rings you're adding. So if you scroll up, we can add loads and loads of rings. So something about there. So this just means, again, with a pencil, it's quite a simple shape, so it's not strictly necessary. But, you know, it's just a good practice to get into. And actually, you know how on a pencil, at the very end of it, you sort of see the little, the core, right, the colored core. We can actually add that now. So if we select all of the vertices here, again, using either, I use Alt-L to do the rings, Alt-left-click to do the ring select. We can press the I key to inset it, to create another face with inside it, and we can sort of shrink it a bit. Do something like that, I think. And then this will be colored whatever color you want the pencil to be. We will see what I mean in a minute. So, okay, we've got I think this is a pretty decent shape. So, okay, first of all, let's add our materials just so it's a bit easier to look at. So let's do the wood first. So you can go into either face edit mode, which is you press the 1, 2, 3 keys on your keyboard to change between editing the points, the edges, and the faces. And let's just do the X-ray mode. And again, you can use the number pad arrows to change between different projections. So it's easy to line things up. So if we select all of our faces here, you can see that we've got them all. We can go into our materials tab, add a new material. Let's call this something sensible, like, I don't know, pencil wood, and do assign. This little section's now been assigned to that material. So let's give it sort of a basic tan color like that. And remember, to actually see our material, we have to be in one of the sort of viewport modes which actually display our material. So, and this one, actually, well, because our pencil doesn't have a material yet, it's assigned our entire pencil to this wooden color. But that's fine. But yes, if you don't see your material changing, that's because you need to be in the correct mode. So this one is just gray. This one actually shows a preview of our materials. Sorry, let's just do that for the rest of it. So again, can use the perspective view, and X-ray on. Otherwise, if I don't have X-ray on, if I do this, you see how I only select half of the faces, and that's not what we want. So we want to select everything. And again, there's loads of ways of doing this. This is just quite a nice lazy way, I find. Now we can add a new material slot by pressing this plus button, then add new. Let's call something like pencil color, something like that. Assign, and then I don't know, what color pencil should we do? I did a red one in the mockups. Let's do a nice blue one, something like that. There we go. So, and then of course we need to add the pencil lead, the tip. That needs to be blue. There we go. Oh, and the very top. Nearly forgot about that face. In fact, while we're here, you know how they're sort of slightly bent? They're sort of not quite aligned. So if we do, yeah, like that, just to make it a bit slightly chiseled look. So there are little details which I think are always quite nice. And then at the bottom here, this is what I meant by the core. We can do that, assign that to blue, and there you go. You see what I mean now. Also, don't forget to save your work regularly. Control S is the hotkey, or you can do File Save. So okay, we have also our basic pencil, and you see it already looks sort of much more convincingly like a pencil. But we want to add a bit more detail. So this pencil, so pencils can be very hexagonal on this one, but the sort of this wooden bit, the tan bit here, usually it's sort of round, and especially the tip as well. That's definitely round. So okay, if we want to make this round, but the rest of it hexagonal, we have a bit of a problem. So usually to add more, sort of make it look smoother, we would go to the modifiers tab, a little spanner, add modifier, and do subdivision surface. And see, this makes it smooth. Brilliant. We can change how smooth it looks, but it's also smoothing out our nice hexagonal look, right? So how do we fix that? Now, there are a bunch of different ways of doing this, but in this particular case, because we want to go from a sort of a hexagonal shape, let's move my cursor, hexagonal shape to a round one, we can use something called creasing in Blender. Now, creasing, it'll tell Blender which edges you want to be sharp or sort of hard, I suppose, and which you want to be soft. And I'll explain this, well, I'll show this, and it should hopefully become more apparent. So currently we have no creases set up. So when we apply our subdivision subsurface, all of it gets smoothed out, right? But okay, the blue section here, the hexagonal part, if we select all of these edges again in X-ray mode, we select all of these edges. Nearly all of the edges. Okay, let's do it in vertex selection mode. Select all the edges, there we go. Although the vertices in this case. If we press, so again, N to bring up this little options menu. If we see here edges data, this option here called mean crease, this is what I was talking about. So this is the mean amount of creasing on all of these points. It's currently 0 because we've set none. But we can click this, so we can actually change it, and you can do this a bunch of ways. You can sort of drag it like this, or you can type in a number. If we set it to say 1, do you see what's happened now? It's all of these edges, which are now purple in the object mode, sorry, in the edit mode, showing that it's creased. These are now, it's quite hard to see here, but here we go. These are now hexagonal. So these edges have been hard. These are still hard edges, right? So they haven't been smoothed out. Yet if we look at the top of the pencil, where there aren't any creases, you see how it's all smooth now? And we can do this to sort of give a little bit of extra detail to our pencil to keep this bit hexagonal and this bit smooth. And in fact, I think it looks slightly better if we take off, so we can, again, use ring select. If we tone this down to about a 0.5, I found that gives a slightly more, smoother transition. So, okay, I think we have a pretty reasonable looking pencil now. I think maybe this bit here. Again, this is where sort of the tweaking comes when we sort of look at something and go, just give it a slight adjustment, see what it looks like. Shrink this again using S to scale, shrink it a little bit. What does that look like? Oh, whoops. Do I have all of the points? Yeah, something like that. All right, cool. So we have our pencil shape. It's now been smoothed off. But okay, well, now we want to add this sort of, because this material, it's a bit flat. It doesn't look very wooden, right? It looks very sort of, a bit flat. So we can now find out what nodes are and shading in Blender. And this is the sort of really powerful way of making custom materials, and it gets really good fun. So before we start, there is a very, very helpful add-on. Now, I think I have to slightly change my screen because I don't think you can see when I go into add-ons. I don't think you can see it. Let me try it. So to access the add-ons in Blender are free little additions that people make. And there's a particular one we want called Node Wrangler. And I'll show you what it does in a minute, but it's insanely useful. So if you go to the top left, you go to Edit in your Blender sort of screen, you go to Preferences. Now, I don't think you can see this screen, but there's a screen which pops up, and there's a little tab on the left called Add-ons. And maybe Christy, you could post a screenshot of the little menu I'm talking about. There's a little sort of magnifying glass search bar. If you type in Node Wrangler, and then it should come up with a sort of an option. There's a little checkbox. Actually, I can share my entire screen. Let's see if I can get this going.
Yeah, I think that might be a bit more effective.
Yeah, will it pause the recording actually? Let's find out. I think you can see my whole screen now. So if we go into Edit, then Preferences, can you see this little menu now?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So yes, this is the Preferences menu. There's a little tab here called Add-ons. If you go to it, and this little search bar here, you type in Node Wrangler. You want to make sure this little box is checked here. And this thing will help us out so much in the next few steps. So make sure that is checked. So okay, let me just go back to the regular share, because my screen can sometimes get a little bit buggy. Okay, right. So now we want to go into the shading tab. So we've been working in the modeling tab for now. And you see on the top how there are these different options. Now, if we go to shading, first of all, it looks completely different. And so I'll explain what each of the different bits are. So we've still got our pencil in the middle, but we have this sort of outliner here. We've got whatever this is down here. This looks sort of, oh, this is where all the fun happens. And we've still reassuringly got our sort of outliner here, so we can see the different objects, and we've got the materials tab. So that's the sort of the difference. So what we want to do is we want to add this sort of wooden texture. So we've selected the pencil, and we can change between which material we want to edit by clicking here, slot 1 or slot 2. So we're going to click on the pencil wood. And OK, we are presented with this. What does all of this mean? Now, this is a node. This is the node editor. So you see we have two sort of boxes here with this big one, this green one called principled BSDF, and this one here, which is called material output. These are both nodes. And what this is kind of like a pipeline for sort of sending instructions to Blender to create a sort of a complicated material out of a lot of different little steps. So this principled BSDF, when we were in our layout mode and we were changing our material here, how we're changing the color, all that stuff, what we're actually doing is changing this box here. That was just a sort of a different way of presenting it. So you can see we have all the same options of our base color, we have our roughness, we have metallicity, all that stuff. All of these options are exactly the same. It's just in a node form. So okay, what can we do? Well, okay, and sorry, and what it does is it calculates everything in this little box. It then sends it connects it to the material output, and this is what we actually see. And you can see the connection through this little line here. So we can add more nodes. So okay, what nodes can we add? Well, what we want to do is make this sort of wood look a bit more, well, like wood. So to add a new node, it's the same shortcut as for adding an object. It's Shift A, and you see this little menu pops up. We can click Search. And what I think we want to do first is add something called a noise texture. So noise is basically just random, sort of static, random stuff. And this is where Node Wrangler comes in really useful, because we can't really see what this is doing currently. We can see what this is doing because it's connected to the output. But if we have Node Wrangler installed and we press Control Shift left click, it now connects this to this little special viewer. And now we can see what this noise texture is actually doing. So you see how it's creating this little sort of foggy gray, sort of white looking bit. This is what this node actually is. And if we change the options, so the scale, you can see, yeah, you can see it sort of responding in turn. So, okay, we can sort of use this to create a bit of a sort of a dappled wood effect, and we can mess around with the settings. So we can change the detail, we can change the scale, we can change the roughness and distortion, things like that. But how do we actually make this into sort of our our wooden texture, right? So, okay, what we could do is we could just sort of plug the color into the surface, right? But that's sort of it's this weird sort of patchy cyan, yellow, pink thing. So we want to make this black and white. Oops. We want to make this black and white texture into a color. So we can add another node, and what this node is called is a color ramp. And this takes an input, and in fact, it automatically connects your little input if you put it between a node. And it will convert it to a color based on these little sort of these color stops we can define. So currently, it's still just converting this black and white texture to something that's black and white. But what if we change these? So instead of black, how about we have a sort of a darker brown, something like this. Instead of white, maybe a lighter brown. So these color stops, you can click on them, and you click on this color here. You can change what they are. And here we go. If we look at the screen here, you see how our pencil's changing color. All right. So this is what our nodes are doing. So again, we're on the sort of the node wrangler for this, so we can see what the effect is. It's first generating this noise texture. So we go always from the left to right with our node system. It's generating this noise texture. Then it's feeding it into the color ramp. So the blackest bits of this noise texture are being assigned to these dark brown colors here, and the lightest bits of this noise texture are being assigned to the sort of the lighter browns here. And we can add more stops if we want. So let's just get the. So we can add more color stops if we want. So if we want a sort of a different gradient, and you can move them around, you can see how it responds. So if we move this dark one up, the darker bits get darker again, or the lighter bits get lighter. And okay, so if you imagine, we can combine lots of different nodes like this together to create a more interesting looking texture. And in fact, if we connect this little color output, so this is outputting our color. If we feed this into the base color of our principled BSDF, and this adds all the sort of the fancy shading, and then we can either use Control left click. Oh, I just realized my screencast keys on. Oh, they're not visible in this mode. Okay, this is not in this mode. That's unfortunate. Make sure this is connected here. You can see this is our sort of our final look. So okay, that's the basics of what nodes do in Blender. You start from the left to the right, and they apply it in a sequence. But okay, this still doesn't look that much like a pencil. So how do we improve this? Well, first of all, this noise texture, it's a little bit stretched. Normally it creates this sort of nice sort of roundish looking clouds. And that's because we haven't specified we haven't given any information on what is actually sort of being applied to, right? So we can add another node, and this one is called a texture coordinate. And this tells Blender basically what our surface, in this case our wooden bit of the pencil, what it actually looks like. And if we put this one called object into a vector here, so a good sort of rule of thumb, if you don't quite know what should connect to what, if you try and match the colors, so this is purple and this is purple, it's usually a good indicator that they are to be matched together. And if we do that, you see how it's changed the response, or how it's changed our pencil here. You can see that it's now this is properly telling this noise texture, oh, okay, this is our surface, and now it looks proper, and this is what a noise texture sort of looks like. We disconnect it, it sort of goes all stretchy again. So in general, that's what these sort of ones are really useful for. So especially if you have a complicated shape, its initial guess isn't that good usually, and this comes down to the squarer you are, the better you are with your faces. So okay, and again we can sort of see that all of this changes properly. But we want to add something a bit more interesting. So with a pencil, I think a wood grain looks quite nice. So you know how you get rings in wood? I think if we added something like this to the pencil, it would look quite fun. So if we add another texture, so we can do Shift A, then search for something called a wave texture. Now, a wave texture, again, we can use the node wrangler, Control Shift left click to see what it's doing. Well, it's doing what it says. It's creating this sort of wavy pattern. Now, again, this has a whole bunch of settings we can play with. So I think it was rings. I think I quite liked. Yeah. And then if we create them, oh no, was it rings? Was it bands? think it's bands, but going diagonally. Oh, you know why? It's because, again, I need to connect the texture coordinate. It's not got any input currently, so we need to tell it what our surface looks like. There we go. Now it's properly knowing, oh, okay, you know, now I know which way its sort of diagonal is. I think that's a bit too many though, so we can change the scale. Something like that, maybe. Change the distortion, so how sort of wiggly it is. Yes, and again, this is a stage where it's purely down to your personal taste, what you want your pencil to look like. I'm just sort of going through some possibilities of what you could do. We can change the detail. So again, that sort of makes it either smooth or a bit more sort of crunchy looking. And okay, I think that's fine. Now we have our noise and we have our wave. How do we combine them? So what we could do is, well, we're thinking we only have one slot here. We can only put one input into this base color for our principal BSDF. So what do we do? Well, thankfully, well, okay, hang on. Before we get to that, first of all, we need to make this wave texture have some color, because currently, it's just this black and white sort of base. If we feed the color input from it into our color ramp, you can now see how it's having this color applied. And in fact, if we do something slightly different, let's maybe make this a bit more red, something like that. Then if we want to make our rings sort of, actually, if we make this lighter, I don't think we want the rings to be too sort of pronounced, a bit too red. Maybe something like that, just so they're not too dramatic. And then we sort of, something like this. I think that's all right. Okay, the problem is we want to mix these two, right? And how do we do that? Well, thankfully, there is a node for that. So there is a node called the Mix RGB. And if we add this in here, you can see that it has two inputs. It has two color inputs, and it outputs one color. All right, brilliant. So what happens if we put this here? So if we feed our color from our noise texture node, which is going to the color amp, put it in there. And our other color amp, we put it in the other slot. And we use our node wrangler. So again, Control Shift left click to see what's going on. You can see what's happening now. It's combined our initial noisy one. It's combining this one. Oh, I should, the color version. It's combining this with this, and it's creating this mix here. And we can actually change the factor by how much it mixes to one or the other. So if we put it all one way, it's just going to be the original. It's going to be this wavy one, this bottom one. Or if it's going to be not mixed at all, it's just going to be the top one. But if we have it in the middle, you can see how it's a bit of a combination of the two. And already, I think this is looking a lot better. We can still improve it, but compared to the sort of original flat base, we've already made something which looks quite complicated with just a handful of these simple nodes. So okay, I think we can add one more sort of bit of detail, and then we can get to something, because it's still flat currently. But if we add one more, so if we add another noise texture, and this time, you know how you get this those quite sort of thin vertical flex, little sort of bumps in the wood? We can actually, if we don't put the vector, input a vector in, and change the scale, you see how it's quite sort of, they're quite long and thin going towards the top of the pencil. We can actually sort of use that in a way. So it's sort of a creative solution where we don't have to do anything else. Right, we add another again. So we always need a color amp unless you want it to be black and white. So what I'm doing here is being a bit lazy. You can click on this and you press Shift and D to duplicate it, just like how you can with a normal object in the modeling mode. And we can add our factor. Here we go. And let's make this quite dark. So let's just change the brightness. Let's make it a bit. Oh, there we go. Yeah, something like that. There we go. Maybe that. And then okay. We add another. We can mix our. Do this again. So we can press Shift D to duplicate. If we add two mix nodes, we can feed this one in the bottom. Sometimes you get a lot of nodes. You need to move them out of the way for a second. There we go. So mix that one on the bottom, and then this one in the top. And we create a sort of a mixture of all three of them. Problem is, if we start mixing too many, it sort of washes out the detail on all of them. So instead, what we can do to get around this problem is we can change the mixing mode. So you see here how there's something called the mixing mode. Because look, if we change the factor, it's sort of, we can't really see any of our detail. If we change this from mix, these are a bunch of different ways to actually combine these two textures. So if you used Photoshop or things like this, you might recognize a few of these options. And I'll find the one here, which is quite good, because mix tries to get a balance between the two. If we just do overlay, it basically just sort of puts one on top of the other without any sort of, it doesn't really try and get a balance. It's just basically how much of this first one do you want to overlay over to the second one. So if we do something like that, you can see we're getting much more sort of detail. We can now see these little flecks from the bottom one. And I think this is not bad, actually. It's maybe a touch too red. Let's see if we can just sort of fix that slightly. Maybe by mixing a little bit less. There we go. And okay, you can see how we've got a pretty cool looking wood texture. I think this looks pretty good, actually. And don't worry if these nodes seem so quite confusing at first, don't worry, because it does take a bit of a time to get used to them, right? But always remember, it's always from the back to the front. So we start off here. This feeds our information to these, what our object looks like, to these noise textures. And in fact, this one as well there. And these noise textures then get converted into colors using these color ramps. It's then this one, these two are being mixed, and then this one and these two are being mixed together. And if we put this color into the base color and this into the surface, we can now see our final texture here. There we go. But there's another bit of a problem, is that this is still flat, right? If we sort of see the lighting, it's not got any depth. It's just basically like we've sort of printed on a bit of paper this sort of wooden texture, and then we've wrapped it around the tip of the pencil. Now, how do we get around this? Well, if we really, really, really wanted to, you could go back into the layout mode. You could add loads and loads of vertices. You could sort of, drag them in and out, and you could create these little bumps. But that would take forever, and also it'd be really hard to change around. So we can, again, there's another solution to this problem, using what is known as a bump map. Now, a bump map, it basically, you feed it, in this case, a texture, and it creates, well, bumps, I suppose. But they're sort of fake. It's like a fake 3D, right? So it's not actually going to our mesh and actually stretching some of the points up, some of the points down. It's not actually doing that. It's by using clever shading. So like how when you look into a hole, one side of the hole's dark and the other sort of lighter. By adding this sort of fake shading onto the surface, it creates a sort of 3D effect. You'll be able to see in a minute a bit more clearly what I mean. So, okay. Well, how do we do this bump map? Well, it's another node. So, okay, there's a bit of a shortcut. If you don't want to click on this, you can press S to search. It's called bump. And what's it doing? So it's got, what inputs are there? Well, so with strength, distance, height, normal. We want height. So this is how, basically the height of our surface, how bumpy it is, right? And what do we want to input? Well, I think the one that worked quite well, I found, is this one. So you see these little flecks? Ideally, the darker bits are sort of where like the wood's sort of been like cut into, if you know what I mean, and then the sort of the white ones are the sort of the ones raised out of it. So if we connect this color input, so this is a case where it's not always the case. So it's not always yellow to yellow, gray to gray. This is a yellow to gray one. But if we connect this color output to the height, and then, okay, what do we do now? We have a normal output here. That goes to normal there. And if we look at this one, what have we got? It's taking a second to load because it's a bit of a more calculating this one, this node. There we go. Okay. First of all, that looks quite terrifying. It's by default, it creates a lot of bumps, but you can see now, right? You can see what I mean? It looks like it's actually sort of this bumpy wooden surface, but it's still a flat plane. It's not actually added any extra sort of points or anything. So this is a really good way of adding detail, 3D detail to your surface because it doesn't take much effort for your computer to process. But I think we do need to change the strength a little bit so it doesn't look quite so scary. So we can just tone the strength down. And look, here we go. Look, now you can see what I mean. This is quite good now. I think about 0.1-ish worked for me last time. Yeah, something like that. So now it looks like our wood's actually sort of a rough surface. And actually, if we just turn the roughness up here on our original shader, make it a bit less shiny. There we go. All right, there we go. That's not bad, actually. So what have we done here? If we go back to our, oops, okay, remember to save, go back to our layout mode. We've now created this cool looking wood texture. So compared to the original pencil, I think we've done quite a good job here. And what we can do now is we can now reposition these pencils. So if we get rid of the old ones, so we can sort of show them here, and we can press the delete button on the keyboard to get rid of them. Make sure we don't delete our nice one. And grab it. Move it around. I won't do too many of these because we're aware of the time. So let's just sort of add two. So grab, move it against the edge. Shift D to duplicate. Oh, my keys are off. Are they on? Maybe re-enable it. There we go. Okay, that's a bit weird. You can do it much more precisely than I am. Just doing a very rough one. There we go. Okay, brilliant. So we found out how to make a cool. So to recap what we've done, we've used our node structure in Blender. We've added some nodes to make a cool wood-looking texture for our pencils. What if you want to change the color? Well, remember, these are still linked. It's still using the same version of the material. So if we want to make this pencil a different color, we have to click. So go to click this pencil, go to the pencil material. This little button with the 2 on it, the 2 shows that 2 objects are using this exact material. So if we click it, it creates a new copy of it just for this pencil. So now we can just change this to whatever we want. Let's do red. And okay, that's how we make our pencils. Now, pencil cup. Let's see if we can do something about this, because again, it's a bit sort of boring and grey currently. It's a cool shape, but I think it could do it with a bit of sprucing up. So what we can do the exact same process. We can use nodes. So go back to the shading tab, give it material. Sort of just getting used to the process. Let's call it, I don't know, pencil cup. And again, let's give it, I don't know, just a base, orange, something different. Right, what do we want to do? Well, let's add a noise texture. I think if you want something cool and a bit abstract, I always find that noise textures are a good way to start off with. So let's go to wave texture again. And again, we do the node wrangler, Control Shift and left click. You can see what this is actually doing. So it's creating these sort of little stripes. So I find that if we make it diagonal, it's always a bit nicer. And okay, let's have some fun with this. So let's change the scale. But I thought that we could put sort of a bit of a wavy, bit of an abstract pencil cup. So if we make this quite distorted, change the sort of detail. There we go. Change the detail to be low so it makes it wavy. We crank up the distortion a bit. Just something a bit weird like this. And what we can then do, maybe a bit less. Again, this is where you can do whatever you want. So actually, in another test, there's something called a Voronoi texture, and this is another sort of noise texture. And you see it creates these little sort of cell-like, quite cool, like sort of biological type sort of noisy things. And we can we can change them. So there are loads of really cool things you can do here. This is just one of many examples. So absolutely go wild and see what cool things you can come up with. But just to show you the structure, so okay, we've got our noise texture. Now we want a color ramp as usual. Add it in the middle here. And okay, if we want them to be flat colors, so okay, what colors do we want? Let's add a sort of blue, something like that. Maybe a bit lighter. There we go. Let's make this one. Add a new one. Let's make this one red, sort of a purpley red, and then let's make this one orange. Sure. Okay, that looks quite nice. But if we want these to be sort of flat colors rather than this sort of gradient, how do we do that? Well, there's something called this option here, which tells us how we want to sort of blend between the little squares. These are called color stops. And you can see how from this blue one to this red one, it's this sort of, it's trying to make it a smooth transition. It's sort of going to purple and then to blue, and the same way here it's going sort of to orange and then to yellow. If we want it to be just blue, red, yellow, we can change this, and this is the blending mode, to constant. And you can see how it's these constant blocks of color now. And if we change these around, if we look back to our pencil cup, you can see there's no more gradient, it's just flat color. So whichever sort of, because there's like a value from 0 to 1 each sort of point here, so the more white it is, the closer it is to 1. It's sort of putting it on this line. So if there's no gradient, it's just gonna be okay. It's just assigning it to a flat color. So all right, and again, we can just sort of play around with this a bit. Might spend too long. Something like that. Maybe change around the order. What do we want to be? Maybe a bit more sort of yellow as a base. Something like that. Okay, and we can change our wavy texture if we want to. If we don't like it that much, maybe. Ooh, maybe something like that. Actually, yeah, that might be quite cool. Quite big stripes. Bit more distorted, bit less distorted, bit more, maybe like that. Yeah, I think that's quite cool. And we can again put the output of this into the base color of our shader. This shader applies all the sort of the roughness, all that stuff, and then we connect that to the output. There we go. Right. And in fact, if we make this a bit shinier, we turn it, make it less rough. It could be, yeah, like sort of a plasticky surface. One last thing, let's quickly add another bump map. Let's see how fast we can do this. So we want a noise, and we want, again, using node. This is whenever you see it sort of quickly flipping to display what's going on, that's just Node Wrangler. Node Wrangler is such a useful add-on. I can't stress it enough. Let's change it to be a bit more scaled. So some plastics like a bit sort of rough and bumpy. Let's do that, and then bump. There we go. So again, we plug factor into the height. Again, so it's the color for this. It is sort of like this weird, so I mean, sort of quite colorful, purpley, bluey thing. In this case, we just want the black and white to be the height. The reason why we do it with the color ramp earlier is because our darker colors, like the brown, corresponded to the sort of the bits we want to be low down, and the sort of the whiter, more tan, were sort of the higher up bits on the wooden surface. But here it's just black and white, which is useful. Can add some normal, and we go back to viewing our principal shader. What does this look like now? Again, takes a little while to load. Oh, okay. Again, looks a little bit scary. Let's make that way less strong. I think, in fact, make this, if we turn up the scale, get smaller. Yeah, something like that. So now it's just the little details. It looks sort of quite a fun little bumpy surface there. So, okay, brilliant. Again, save. All right, let's see if I can do custom texturing in 10 minutes. I think we'll just be able to make it. So brilliant. We have our pencil cup. We have our pencils. Now we just need some paper to draw on, right? As otherwise, why do we have these pencils? So we can temporarily click hide them. We want to add a piece of paper. So we add a plane as sort of paper's nice and flat. You can sort of, if you want to be exact, you can sort of do this to A4 dimensions or anything. But actually, I'll go on then. I did write them down. So we can change dimensions. So yeah, this is also 2 meters. We can change. We can sort of at the end make the units make sense, as this is a 2 meter piece of paper. But well, I think that's that way around. There we go. 2. As long as everything's proportional to each other, it shouldn't be too bad. Actually, I think. See if I got it right in a minute. All right, piece of paper, brilliant. Right, how do we? So what I was thinking is we could sort of create like a little drawing on this bit of paper, and as a way of demonstrating how you can make your own textures. So instead of having to use the sort of the noise textures, the wave textures, if you wanted to actually draw your own texture or import a texture you've already made, how do you do that? So, okay, you know the drill by this point. We have new material. Let's call this paper. And we go into the shading tab. Well, here's our thing. How do we add our image? Well, again, the solution is using nodes. So if we add, so Shift A to add, click to search, we add something called an image texture. This is so we can either open a file we already have, or we can create a new one to edit on it, because Blender has an inbuilt, fairly basic, although pretty decent sort of text editor. So okay, we want to add a new texture, so we hit new. Let's call this, I don't know, paper tutorial. Ooh. Cool. Width and height. Oh man, here's where so height, it was 2970. I'm just going by the dimensions of A4 paper here. If you're wondering what I'm doing, you don't have to be exact. But if you want it to be like that, we can change the basic color. Let's make it white. And okay, click OK. And we've saved it. So where is this paper? And in fact, we want to connect the color of this to the base color like that. All right, where is this texture and how can we edit it? Well, there's another tab up here called Texture Paint. If we go to it here, we now have our white texture, paper tutorial here, and we can actually draw on it. So if you press N, we can get up this sidebar, it's like the options menu. And in fact, we can choose, this is our brush, we can choose the color, let's say blue. We can now draw, and look, you can see that it's, and in fact, I have done it the wrong way around. Oops. We can now draw on this, and it appears on our paper, and we can do the other way around. So we can draw on our paper in the object in our real space, and it appears on our little flat texture. It's a bit stretched, as because despite me trying to get the dimensions the right way around, I got them the wrong way around. So that should be 2.1 meters. And that should be 7. There we go. Now that's the correct proportion. There we go. So now it's not stretched anymore. Okay. Rapidly, how do we? What should we do? Well, first of all, to change our brush size, we press F to make it, so this is a little circle, this is our brush, and this might be a bit, there we go. Sometimes it is a bit, it can be a little bit sort of laggy. This just solely depends on how fast your computer is, because it's sort of calculating all these different things going on. But there we go, so we've got our blank piece of paper. We want to add, I think, a little pencil drawing of a rocket, something like that, something quite fun. So change our brush size, and we can change the brush strength as well, pressing Shift F. So in case you want it to be full strength or minimum strength, let's do sort of a blue color, like a blue pencil, and we can sort of draw a rocket. Ooh. But you can see how this is sort of a flat color. If we want to add a different brush in, we can go into this option here. So again, this is our brush. This is all the settings relating to our brush. Something called texture, and this is basically what texture it's painting on. So if we click new, and in fact, if we go on to the right hand side of the screen down to our texture properties, we can see it's now saved. It's got brush. It's got our texture here. It says type, image or movie. Well, we can change this to something called clouds. And this is just our noise texture you recognized from earlier, right? And in fact, it's called the same options. So we can change the size like that. Well, almost all the same options. And now when we draw, sometimes, there we go. You see how it's now a bit sort of noisy like this? That is what we can do. So you can do this any shape you want. So this is a really easy way to get sort of, that's a bit dark. In fact, if we change this, there we go. Just a bit of extra interesting sort of detail in your textures. Right now, let's just quick drop it. Oh, and to save our texture, it's not Control S, it is Alt S. I don't know why it's different. They just want to catch you out, I suppose. But make sure to save your textures, as otherwise, if you leave, it will not save it, which will not be good. You have to do it all again. Let's just quickly draw a sort of rocket shape. Yeah, so you probably do a slightly nicer brush than I was just doing really basic, just to show you what's going on. Something like that. Add our fins. There we go. And the nose cone. Some quick windows. And of course our jet. There we go. Cool. All right. Again, Alt S to save. So if we go back to our layout, you can see that our texture's there. So we've successfully managed to create a custom texture. And of course, you could create it in like Photoshop or something and import it just by going to shading. And instead of clicking new, you click open instead, and you can open your own texture. So that's how you can get the sort of the really cool looking ones. And okay, right. In the last 5 minutes, I just want to quickly talk about how we want to render this scene. So first of all, let's do a bit of scene composition. So everything's sort of stacked on top of each other, right? And I think all the things are slightly out of proportion. So let's organize it. So if we go to our rocket, we can move everything here. We haven't parented it, so what we can do is we can click on the rocket, the collection named rocket. We can then do select objects to grab everything in it. And if we just move it, I think we want to shrink it a bit as well. It's a bit too large. And if we go into our projection view, we want to sort of make it line up with the base here. I'm just changing the size of things just so that they're slightly more sensible, right? And this paper, again, it's a bit more. Oh, whoops. Rotate. There we go. There we go. Cool. I think we quickly want to add a table as well. So we can add a plane, scale it up, make sure it's below everything else. So otherwise you get some sort of slight clipping issues in which the things will be below it. We have now got a table. Let's move the rocket. No, whoops, we've actually managed to add the table to our rockets collection, which we don't want. So if we want to move it back, we just do M to move it back to the scene collection. So rockets, select everything. There we go, just it barely touches the table. There we go. Again, you can be much more precise than me. So okay, we have a nice little scene here. In fact, if we just make our plane, give it a material, what should we do? Blue? A nice sort of green one. All right, how do we turn this scene into a render? So if we want to create a cool picture, well, okay, we could just screenshot it here, but that won't look as good as a proper render. So what is rendering? Rendering is we have a camera here. We haven't talked about the camera yet, but the camera is it's like, you're taking a photo. This is what it's looking through what your final scene is going to look like, the perspective of your final scene. So if we press the 0 button on your number pad, it will actually snap to the camera view. And this little rectangle is what our final picture will contain. And so we can use this actually to sort of line up what's in frame. So if we click on our camera, either by clicking the little rectangle, or we can click on it in the collection, press G to grab it, we can move it just like the other thing. So we can move the frame around. If we press G to grab the middle mouse button, we can zoom it in and out. And in fact, we've got a bit of dead space on the side here, right? We have these sort of sections where there's nothing really in it. So if we want to change that, we can go into the output properties. And these are the dimensions of our scene, our camera. So if we change them to be the same as each other, so 1080 by 1080, oops, if I can type. Now our camera is a sort of a square. We can zoom it in using G and then left click, middle mouse button. And we make our table a bit bigger because you can see that there is a bit of a gap there. So we've sort of got a basic scene here. How do we render it? Right. So briefly, there are two main rendering engines in Blender. There is Eevee, which is what we're currently on, which is sort of it's quite quick. It's not as good with lighting, but it's sort of a good fast pass, and things like computer games use Eevee because it doesn't take that much time to do. There's also Cycles, which is really good for lighting, but it sort of takes, in fact, if we want to go into this preview mode, it takes ages to sort of load. And also you can see it looks quite sort of weird and pixely when we're scrolling around. It's because it's doing successively more advanced sort of calculations of our scene. So we want to stick on Eevee for now, as there we go. We don't get that weird effect. We want to change our lighting, I think. So this is a light. We can move them around just like any other object, and you can add them. So again, you can do Shift A to add. You see lights. You have different types of lights. So for now, we can use a point light. We can manipulate them just like any other object. We can change how powerful they are. So if you want to make this a more powerful light, we can turn this up here. In fact, it's probably easy to type in. There we go. So if we just create sort of a maybe have an overhead light here. Something nice and simple, just so it doesn't look a bit scary. And in fact, we can change this to be a sun type light, which, oh, okay, that's a bit too powerful. Sunlight, it's not from a point, it's just a flat sort of like amount of light on the surface, so you don't have to worry about distance or anything. So it's just sort of, imagine the same amount of light is hitting every surface in this direction rather than coming from a single point. And I think it just looks a bit nice. So we can press number pad 0 to move back to our camera. We can just sort of, there we go, just make sure the lighting's decent. And sometimes you do get these slight errors with Eevee. So you can see how our shadow, it's sort of not quite properly rendering it now. That is just something you have to deal with when using Eevee, but we can sort of slightly cheat and move our lights around so we don't see that. Ooh. Bit of a cheaty way, but if it works, it works. There we go. Cool, right. And all right, I need to quickly swap to my other screen share now because I realized the render thing is in a separate window. There we go. So, okay, how do we actually render it? So we've got our scene set up, we've got everything in the camera. How do we get our final picture? Well, in the render tab, or in the options at the top, there's a button called render. If we click this, there should be one called render image, and we hit that, and there we go. It's literally as simple as that. So it's now created a much neater version of our picture of our scene. And this is using the Eevee renderer, and it's got our nice picture. We can save this picture, we can do whatever we want with it. This is how we do a final render. And there are loads and loads of options changed here. This is just a very basic render. And just to show you what Cycles is like, it does take a lot longer, probably a few minutes for this one. It sort of works it out square by square. So you can see here it's a lot more detailed, but it will take a while, so let's not do that. But we can cheat a little bit, and in Eevee we can get some better looking results. This little sort of camera button are the render properties, and these is an easy way of how we can add extra detail without having to swap to Cycles. So in brief, these different options, ambient occlusion is sort of soft shadows. Bloom adds a bit of sort of color and vibrancy to reflections, things like that. And the important one is screen space reflections, which lets the environment reflect off of our object. So it's not actually that visible here. But if we move our thing here, actually, if we make our rocket slightly more reflective, maybe it'll be easier to see. Turn the roughness down. Maybe this is quite rough. There we go. Okay, it's not as quite as visible as I thought, but basically it lets other objects in the scene sort of reflect off each other. So if we don't have it enabled, there we go. Look, you can see. So you can see at the bottom of this pencil cup, it's quite green. It's because the green table which we set up is reflecting off of our pencil cup. But if we turn it off, you can see we don't get any of that. And Cycles does this all automatically. But if we don't want to use Cycles because it takes ages, we can just sort of turn it on. And just show you ambient occlusion. You can sort of, it's quite hard to see, but it's just a good one to keep on. Okay, you can't really see it. And then Bloom just adds a bit more vibrancy. Briefly, let's just change this material. Don't know why that's. Oh my. Right, it's because I'm not even changing the correct material. That's why. Always check which material you're editing. There we go. That's okay. Now it's you can definitely see now it's reflecting. You can see the other reflections there. Okay. Right, I think we've gone slightly over time, so I think we'll have to stop it there. I'll hang around. We can hang around for some stuff afterwards, but I think the official class is finished. So I'll just do the final render. What does it look like? There we go. Not so bad, I think. And you can see how much more detail is in the render. Okay,